He sat in silence, his hands shackled in front of him, elbows resting on the cold, scratched courtroom table. His jacket was torn, the fabric ragged from the scuffle the night before, and his hair was a mess, disheveled from the chaos that had unfolded. No one in the courtroom spared him a second glance. He was just another old man, stubborn and rebellious, hauled in for disturbing the peace. The arresting officers stood in the back, arms crossed, smirking to themselves as though they'd done the world some great favor. The judge, flipping through his folder with the kind of bored indifference only someone used to this kind of case could have, didn't bother to look up. No one knew his name. No one cared. At least, not yet. Then, without warning, the back doors of the courtroom flew open. And that's when everything changed. A four-star general, dressed in full military uniform, entered the room with a presence so commanding it felt like the walls themselves paused to take notice. His boots struck the floor like the beat of a war drum, resounding with authority. Every head in the room turned. Every person froze. And for the first time since his arrest, the man in cuffs, Walter Briggs, finally lifted his eyes. What was happening? Who was this man who had suddenly commanded the attention of everyone in the room? Before we continue with this shocking turn of events, let me ask you something. Have you ever met a hero who served in silence, unnoticed and unsung, and yet carried the weight of the world on their shoulders? If you think stories like this, powerful, raw, and emotional, deserve to be shared, hit that subscribe button and join us in honoring these quiet legends. Walter Briggs, a name most wouldn't recognize, lived alone at the edge of a small town, in a single-story cabin tucked away among thick trees. He lived a life of solitude. No visitors, no phone, no internet. Just an old truck, a porch that creaked under his boots as he walked across it, and a workshop filled with rusted tools and forgotten memories, memories no one had asked about in years. Walter wasn't unfriendly, just quiet, distant. People who passed him in town occasionally nodded in greeting, but he rarely acknowledged them. They all thought he was just another aging loner, a man who had never really adapted to life after the military. But here's the truth, Walter Briggs never tried to adapt. And who could blame him? You see, Walter had served 31 years in the Navy, 17 of them as a SEAL sniper. He had been deployed to 5 continents, on missions that were scrubbed from official records, but burned into his mind like brands. He never spoke of them, never shared any of the things he had witnessed or the things he had done. When he retired, he turned down the pension, refused the ceremony, and disappeared. Not out of bitterness, but because the war had taken enough from him. He didn't need medals or applause. What he craved was silence, a chance to be left alone to live in peace. And so, that's what he did. Walter spent his days repairing things, radios, tools, even old prosthetics for disabled veterans who couldn't afford replacements. And for his work, they paid him in firewood, canned food, or nothing at all. But Walter never asked for anything in return. He lived simply, deliberately, with no ties to the outside world. His only connection to anything beyond his cabin was a battered flip phone, held together with duct tape, which he mostly used as a flashlight. But the trouble, as it often does, started on a Tuesday afternoon. Walter had driven into town, intending to buy a few simple things, AA batteries and a part for a neighbor's lawnmower. After paying in cash, he stepped outside the hardware store and found a small spot on the curb where there was an outdoor outlet. His phone had died hours earlier, and he needed it to arrange a ride for a wheelchair-bound vet that he planned to help later that evening. So, he plugged his phone in and sat down to wait. That's when the store manager came out. A man in his mid-30s, impatient, clipboard in hand. He didn't know Walter, didn't see a man in need of a simple charge. Instead, he saw a grizzled, unshaven figure in a worn jacket sitting by the sidewalk. "I'm going to need you to move along, sir," the manager said. Walter didn't respond right away. He simply muttered, "Just charging my phone." But the manager wasn't having it. "You can't do that here." Walter didn't look up, didn't even raise his voice. "I'll be gone in 10 minutes, he said calmly. The manager wasn't satisfied. "That's not how this works. Get up now, or I'm calling the cops." Walter didn't argue. He just met the man's gaze, calm and unshaken, and said, "Do what you need to." 15 minutes later, 2 officers arrived. Young, confident, maybe even a little bored. They assessed the situation and made their assumptions. One officer told Walter to stand up. But Walter didn't move, not out of defiance, but because years of wear and tear had left him with a damaged hip from a jump that had gone wrong. The officer grabbed his arm. Walter, with years of military training, shifted his weight and brushed the hand aside, not violently, just instinctively. That's when the second officer lunged at him. Within 2 minutes, Walter found himself on the ground. His face pressed to the cold concrete, arms twisted behind his back, cuffs clicking shut. None of the officers noticed the tattoo partially visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. None of them saw the scar below his right ear, or the straight-back discipline of a man who had survived hell and never asked for anything in return. To them, Walter Briggs was just another vagrant, another man causing trouble. They hauled him into the squad car, never bothering to read him his rights. At the station, Walter gave a false name, not because he was trying to lie, but because his real name didn't matter anymore. He didn't need to be remembered. He didn't need their system. But the system, when pushed far enough, doesn't forget. And someone was watching. The holding cell Walter was placed in was small and cold, smelling of bleach and concrete. He sat on the metal bench, still cuffed, silent. He hadn't spoken since his arrest, hadn't asked for a lawyer, hadn't made a phone call. The officers processing him didn't push the issue. They had already written him off as just another delusional old man. A man pretending to be tougher than he looked. At the front desk, one of the younger cops entered the arrest report. He didn't know how to categorize Walter, no ID, no background. The fingerprint scanner kept returning errors. Frustrated, the officer entered John Doe, possible homeless, and moved on. Later that afternoon, Walter was transported to the county courthouse. Shackled to a metal rail, he was escorted alongside 2 men arrested for fighting behind a bar. When they arrived, Walter was marched into the courtroom, still cuffed, still silent. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He simply existed. The courtroom was nearly empty, a bored bailiff, a city prosecutor flipping through a stack of minor infractions, a public defender who hadn't yet even glanced at Walter's file, and the judge, a man more accustomed to handling traffic tickets than anything else, leaning back in his chair and sighing. The case was called. Walter was led to the defense table. No one reacted. He looked like a man who had no idea where he was or what was happening to him. The judge, a little annoyed, asked for his name. Walter said nothing. The public defender shrugged and asked for a brief recess to try to get clarity on the situation. The judge reluctantly granted 5 minutes. In the back of the room, a clerk named Alan, only 24 years old, a Marine Reserve and second-generation military man, was watching with a growing sense of unease. Something about this old man didn't fit the scene. Alan had seen his fair share of posturing, men who wore fake medals or tried to act tough. But this wasn't that. This man didn't speak at all, and that, more than anything, made Alan uneasy. Then, as Walter shifted slightly, his sleeve pulled back just enough to expose his left forearm. Alan's eyes caught the faded, sun-worn tattoo, a trident, not the commercial kind, but the real SEAL insignia, embedded in a sniper qualification ring, flanked by hash marks denoting tours that no longer existed in official records. Alan's breath caught in his throat. His father had once told him quietly that real SEALs never bragged. The ones who survived stayed quiet because they didn't need to explain what they had done. In a split-second decision, Alan stood up from his desk, stepped into the hallway, and made a call to a family friend stationed at the Pentagon. He wasn't sure what he was asking, just that something didn't sit right. He gave a description, told the friend about the tattoo, the lack of ID. The man on the other end of the line went silent for a long moment. "What's his name?" the voice finally asked. He didn't give one, but the tattoo, first SEAL sniper, early generation. Real as it gets. Another pause. Then, with absolute certainty, "Hold tight. Don't let the case proceed. I'll take care of it." Alan returned to the courtroom, his pulse racing. No one noticed the quiet tension building. The judge resumed the hearing, the public defender fumbling for a request for leniency. The prosecutor mumbled about store policies and respecting authority. And Walter? He said nothing. Then, at exactly 9:43 a.m., the doors opened. Two uniformed aides stepped in, clearing a path. And behind them, walking with purpose, was a man whose mere presence made the entire room fall silent. A four-star general in full dress uniform, his ribbons gleaming, his posture rigid, and his eyes locked ahead with steely determination. The general stopped at the bar, turned toward the judge, and said, clearly, with the authority only a man like him could command, "Your Honor, I request the floor." The judge, confused, looked up. It took him a moment to fully understand what was happening. The courtroom wasn't used to visitors like this. And certainly not a full general, flanked by aides wearing service ribbons that reached the shoulder seam. The prosecutor's mouth hung open, and the public defender slowly closed the file in front of him. Even the arresting officers, who had been so smug, straightened instinctively. Their smirks vanished. Who was this man? Why had he come to this courtroom? What had Walter Briggs done to deserve such an honor? The answer, as it would soon be revealed, was that Walter had done far more than anyone could ever imagine, quietly, humbly, without a word of complaint. But you'll have to wait to hear the rest of the story. Trust me, it's worth it. State your name for the record, the judge said, his voice coming out with more indifference than authority. General Marcus Weller, United States Army, retired, the man responded, his voice steady and unwavering. I'm here on behalf of the defendant. In the silence that followed, Walter Briggs didn't move. His head stayed down, his eyes fixed on the floor as though the weight of the world was pressing down on him. He didn't need to look up. He didn't need to say anything. He had lived his life in silence, and silence was all he knew. But that silence, one that had been forced upon him for so many years, was about to be broken in a way he could never have anticipated. General Marcus Weller, the man who had just spoken, didn't hesitate. He turned slightly, his eyes locking onto Walter for a moment before he looked back at the judge. The man you have in custody, Weller continued, his voice calm yet heavy with respect, is Staff Chief Walter Briggs, retired, United States Navy SEAL, SEAL Team 2, Sniper Unit. Active from 1971 to 2002. Confirmed operations in Somalia, Bosnia, classified recon in Iraq before the invasion, and forward overwatch in Operation Anaconda. He is the recipient of the Navy Cross, Silver Star, and Joint Service Commendation with Valor. He is also one of the last living original generation SEAL snipers still walking. And you have him cuffed for charging his phone. The room fell into an intense, suffocating silence. No one knew how to react. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause. Walter's name, his achievements, the sacrifice of his silent service, had been laid out in front of everyone, and no one knew what to do with it. But Walter didn't respond. He stayed silent, staring at the floor, allowing the words to wash over him without any change in his demeanor. Weller walked over to the defense table, stopping right in front of Walter. His tone shifted, not for show, not for drama, but because it was the only way to speak to a man like Walter. With absolute respect. Chief Briggs, Weller said, the words slow and deliberate. Sir, you once saved my brother in Kandahar. You pulled him from a burning Humvee under sniper fire. You were wounded and refused medevac. I've waited 15 years to shake your hand. Walter slowly, almost imperceptibly, looked up. His eyes didn't soften, and his face didn't change. He didn't offer a smile or any acknowledgement. He just stared at Weller, the silence between them so thick it almost felt like a third presence in the room. Finally, Walter spoke, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "He made it." Weller's voice cracked. "He did. Thanks to you." The judge, who had been leaning back in his chair, now sat forward, clearly shaken by the revelation. His voice was almost a whisper. "I had no idea." "That's the point," Weller interrupted, his calm demeanor not wavering. "Men like him don't announce who they are. They don't wear their medals to court. They don't post about their service on social media. They come home, and they disappear, because everything they did is already burned into their souls. But when they're treated like criminals for sitting quietly on a sidewalk, something is broken." Weller turned his gaze to the bailiff, who had been standing in the corner of the room. "Remove the cuffs." The bailiff hesitated, his eyes darting between Weller and Walter, unsure how to proceed. But Weller's voice was clear, firm, and without room for argument. "That wasn't a request." The cuffs came off. Walter didn't look at anyone. He simply rubbed his wrists slowly, as if the weight of the chains he had just shed were lighter than the weight of everything else he had carried over the years. "I want all charges dropped immediately," Weller said, his voice strong with finality. "And I want this man's name cleared, sealed, and protected." The judge, still processing the turn of events, nodded slowly. "Yes, of course. All charges dismissed. Expunged." One of the officers, the same ones who had arrested Walter earlier, tried to speak, but Weller cut him off without raising his voice. "Next time you put your hands on someone, ask who they are first." Walter stood up. He didn't thank anyone. He didn't need to. He picked up his jacket, folded it over his arm, and began walking toward the door. Weller followed him, but just before Walter exited, he leaned in slightly and spoke quietly, as though only Walter could hear. "The silence you've lived in all these years," Weller said, "it mattered. Even when the rest of the world forgot, we didn't." Walter didn't respond. His face didn't soften. But for the first time since the trial had begun, his face shifted, just barely. A tiny movement in the corner of his mouth, a half-inch shift, like the beginning of a smile, but not quite. It wasn't happiness, but something close to it. And with that, he walked out, the door closing behind him with a soft thud that echoed in the room. But Walter didn't return home right away. No, he drove past his street, past the gas station where the clerk always looked right through him, past the American Legion post he had never entered. He kept driving, pushing himself further from everything that was familiar. He parked at the edge of the local veteran cemetery, the engine still running as he sat in the car, staring out the windshield. In the glove box, tucked away carefully, was the coin that General Weller had pressed into his hand before they parted. An old challenge coin, heavy with meaning and silence. On the back, etched deep into the metal, were 4 words, "Your silence was never wasted." He didn't cry. He didn't smile. He just sat there, letting it all sink in. All the years, all the pain, all the sacrifice. For the first time in so long, Walter didn't feel invisible. It wasn't about the recognition, it never had been. But what had happened in that courtroom had cracked something inside him, something he had thought was long buried. He hadn't wanted recognition. He didn't need it. But the simple act of someone, one person, remembering him, seeing him, acknowledging what he had done, made all the difference. It was as though the world hadn't forgotten him after all. Later that week, word of what had happened spread. But not in the usual way. Not loud, not viral, just quietly, among the right people. At the SEAL training compound, 2 states over, instructors mentioned the story to their recruits, using it as a lesson that not all heroes wear medals in public. Not all legends are written in textbooks. At the local VFW hall, a framed photograph appeared near the bar, an old, grainy black and white picture of a sniper team, huddled together in a mountain pass. Beneath it, someone had written, "He never asked to be known, so we won't name him, but we remember." At the courthouse, the staff didn't speak about the day the general had walked in. But those who were there would never forget it. The judge became quieter in his rulings. The prosecutor started looking twice at every name he processed. Even the arresting officer, the young, proud one, requested reassignment shortly after. And Alan, the clerk who had made the call to check into Walter's identity, never told anyone what pushed him to do it. But a week later, a package arrived at his apartment. No return address. Inside was a book, SEAL Team History Declassified, Volume 1, and tucked into the front cover was a folded sheet of paper. It wasn't signed. It simply read, "You looked closer." Most don't. That matters. As for Walter, life resumed its quiet pace. He returned to his routines, same coffee, same truck, same quiet walks at sunrise. But those who passed him by noticed something had changed. He stood a little straighter, not prouder, not cocky, just steadier. Less like a shadow and more like a man who was willing to be seen again. And once a month, without fail, Walter would return to the same small courtroom. Not to watch the proceedings, not to relive the moment, but to sit on the back bench, anonymous among the crowd, quietly observing. Perhaps, just perhaps, someone else might need what he had once been denied, a second look, a chance to be seen. Walter never wanted the attention. He never wanted a courtroom full of silence. He never wanted a general to walk through a door to defend him. All he had ever wanted was peace, to carry the weight he had earned without having to prove anything to anyone. But sometimes, when the world forgets what a hero looks like, it takes one moment, one gesture, to remind everyone. Walter didn't need a medal pinned on his chest or his name printed in a newspaper. He never asked for that. What he needed, what all of them need, is to know that, after everything they gave, someone still sees them. And sometimes, that's all any of them want. Because not all warriors speak. Some serve in silence. And when they return home, most just want to live quietly, with the dignity they never demanded and the respect they never asked for. So if you ever pass a man like Walter, sitting alone on a bench, waiting in a waiting room, maybe even in a courtroom, take a moment to look again. You might just be standing next to someone who changed the course of history and never said a word about it. I find the story of Walter Briggs deeply moving and thought-provoking, especially in the context of how society often overlooks its true heroes. It's heartbreaking to think that someone who has sacrificed so much, someone who literally risked his life to save others, can be dismissed, ignored, or treated like just another troublemaker. We live in a world that celebrates noise, attention, and spectacle, but the real strength often lies in quiet humility. The kind of service Walter provided was not for medals, not for recognition, but for the simple desire to do what needed to be done. The silence in his life isn't just about his personal choice, it's about the way we, as a society, fail to see the value in those who don't shout their worth from the rooftops. We have built a culture that celebrates the loudest voices, the most visible actions. But what if the true measure of greatness lies in how we act when no one is watching? Walter's story is a stark reminder that not all heroes wear their medals or tell their stories. Some of them walk quietly among us, invisible, carrying the weight of their experiences without asking for anything in return. In a world that often values fame over integrity, the story of Walter reminds us that respect and dignity are the real prizes. We need to do better in recognizing those who serve without wanting the applause. It's time we learn to look closer, to truly see the people around us, and to honor them, not for the recognition they seek, but for the quiet, unwavering strength they offer to the world. Now, I ask you, have you ever met someone like Walter Briggs? Someone who served, never told their story, and carried it all alone. Say their name in the comments. Let others know the stories we were never meant to forget. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please subscribe, share, and help us keep these voices alive. And the next time you see a quiet man standing alone, don't just walk past. You might be standing next to someone who saved the world, and never told a soul.